In February 1986, Nintendo released a game that would change the industry forever. The Legend of Zelda wasn't just another title competing for attention on the Famicom Disk System. It was a revolutionary vision that took the concept of video games as linear challenges and exploded it into something completely different. A world to explore, a mystery to unravel, a miniature garden you could put inside your drawer. Nearly 40 years later, The Legend of Zelda stands as one of the most influential games ever created, the foundation for an entire genre and the beginning of a franchise that has sold over 150 million copies worldwide. But the story of how this masterpiece came to be is more than just a development history. It's a story about childhood wonder transformed into interactive art, about technical limitations breeding creative innovation, and about one man's memories of exploring forests near Kyoto becoming the blueprint for countless adventures. Today, we're exploring the full story of The Legend of Zelda, from its origins in Shigeru Miyamoto's childhood to its revolutionary impact on gaming that still echoes through the industry today. The story begins not in a development studio, but in the countryside around Sonobe, near Kyoto, Japan, where a young Shigeru Miyamoto spent his childhood in the 1950s and early 1960s. Miyamoto's family home was surrounded by hillsides, forests, and fields that called out to be explored. Unlike modern children with structured activities and constant supervision, Miyamoto had the freedom to wander, to get lost, to discover. And those childhood adventures would become the spiritual core of The Legend of Zelda decades later. Miyamoto has spoken repeatedly about his most memorable childhood experience, finding a cave entrance in the middle of the woods. He stood at that dark opening, hesitant, unsure what might be inside. After gathering his courage, he entered with a lantern and explored the cave's depths. The mixture of fear and exhilaration, the thrill of discovering something unknown, the sense that anything could be waiting in the darkness, these sensations stayed with him for years. When he finally had the tools to create video games, he wanted to recreate that exact feeling for players around the world. But it wasn't just the cave. Miyamoto explored nearby fields and woods, traveling without maps, stumbling upon amazing things, experiencing the pure joy of discovering a hidden lake or an unexpected clearing. He also remembered becoming lost in the maze of sliding doors in his family home, an experience that would directly inspire Zelda's labyrinthine dungeons. These weren't abstract design concepts. They were visceral childhood memories that Miyamoto wanted to share, to transform into interactive experiences that would let players feel what he'd felt as a boy. Miyamoto joined Nintendo in 1977 with help from his father, impressing company president Hiroshi Yamauchi with his toys and creative ideas. At the time, Nintendo was transitioning from a traditional card and toy manufacturer into the video game business. Miyamoto's first major success came with Donkey Kong in 1981, followed by the landmark Super Mario Bros. In 1985, which would sell over 40 million copies and establish Nintendo as the dominant force in home gaming. But even as Super Mario Bros. Was being developed, Miyamoto was already thinking about his next project, something more personal, something that would capture his childhood adventures. Development of The Legend of Zelda began in late 1984, running concurrently with Super Mario Bros. This parallel development was intentional, and the teams made conscious efforts to keep the games distinct. Super Mario Bros. Was designed to be linear, with action occurring in a strict sequence, a mad dash from left to right that could be conquered quickly by skilled players. The Legend of Zelda would be the opposite, non-linear, exploratory, a world where players decided where to go and what to do next. The contrast was deliberate, creating two complementary visions of what video games could be. Miyamoto worked closely with Takashi Tezuka, who handled story and writing duties. Tezuka was a fan of fantasy literature, particularly J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, and he drew heavily from those influences when creating Zelda's narrative framework. The result was a straightforward but effective premise. Link, a young elf-like boy, must collect 8 fragments of the Triforce of Wisdom scattered across Hyrule to rescue Princess Zelda from the evil Ganon. It was pure adventure fantasy, perfectly suited for the technology and perfectly aligned with Miyamoto's childhood exploration memories. The name choices reveal interesting backstories.
Princess Zelda was named after Zelda Fitzgerald, wife of famous novelist F. Scott Fitzgerald. Miyamoto heard the name and simply liked it, finding it pleasant and significant, and he thought Zelda Fitzgerald was said to be a famous and beautiful woman. Ganon was initially called Hawkeye, after a pig-like character from a popular Japanese story. Link earned his name because he was the player's link into the game world, designed to be someone players could identify with, rather than a predefined hero with established personality. He starts as an ordinary boy and grows stronger through his journey, a deliberate choice to make players feel like they were experiencing his growth firsthand. The game was initially developed under the working title Adventure, reflecting Miyamoto's goal of capturing childhood adventures in digital form. The development team generated so many ideas during production that they couldn't incorporate everything into the first game. Many concepts were saved and eventually appeared in later Zelda titles, creating a repository of innovation that would fuel the franchise for decades. Much of the programming was handled by Toshihiko Nakago of SRD, Nintendo's longtime partner company. Keiji Terui, a screenwriter who worked on anime shows like Dr. Slump and Dragon Ball, wrote the backstory for the manual, drawing inspiration from conflicts in medieval Europe. Another major influence came from cinema. The Indiana Jones films, particularly Raiders of the Lost Ark in 1981, made a huge impression on Miyamoto. In a developer interview promoting the NES Classic Edition, when asked why he created Zelda, Miyamoto immediately acknowledged the Indiana Jones movies that were so popular in the 1980s, stating he wanted to bring that sense of adventure to a video game. The persistent archaeologist embarking on perilous adventures to obtain rare artifacts, raiding ancient temples and tombs, that spirit of exploration and discovery aligned perfectly with what Miyamoto wanted to achieve. The technical specifications of The Legend of Zelda were ambitious for 1986. The game was designed as a launch title for the Famicom Disk System, a peripheral for the Japanese Famicom that used rewritable floppy disks with 112 kilobytes capacity. This was significantly more storage than standard NES cartridges offered, allowing Miyamoto to create a much larger, more content-rich world. Crucially, the disk system enabled save functionality, essential for a game of Zelda's scope. Before battery backup systems were invented for cartridges, saving progress was impossible on console games. The disk system solved this problem, allowing players to save their adventure and return later. The save feature was revolutionary, but also risky. Nintendo executives worried that players would get lost in the nonlinear dungeons and become frustrated.
During pre-release testing, players complained about confusion and difficulty navigating the maze-like levels. Instead of simplifying the game, Miyamoto made it slightly more difficult. In early designs, Link started with his sword already in his inventory. Miyamoto removed it, forcing players to find the old man in the cave who gives Link his sword. This wasn't just about difficulty, it was about teaching players to explore, to talk to NPCs, and to understand that secrets are hidden everywhere. Miyamoto wanted players to interact, to share discoveries with friends, to create a new form of gaming communication. This philosophy of discovery through exploration became Zelda's defining characteristic. Miyamoto wanted players to feel completely lost and immersed, to experience the same feeling you'd get when exploring a new city for the first time. In a 1989 interview, he explained that he was not interested in systems where everything is decided by stats and numbers, but wanted to preserve as much of that live feeling as possible. He believed action games were better suited to convey this feeling to players. This is why Zelda, despite having RPG elements, was classified by Miyamoto as a real-time adventure game, rather than a traditional RPG. The music became another crucial element of Zelda's identity. Composer Koji Kondo initially planned to use Maurice Ravel's Bolero as the title theme, as it perfectly matched the game's speed. Under Japanese copyright law, music enters public domain 50 years after the composer's death, and Kondo thought Ravel's work qualified. However, he discovered in November 1985, late in development, that it had only been 47 years and 11 months since Ravel's death. Forced to change the music immediately, Kondo wrote a new arrangement of the overworld theme in just one day.
That hasty composition became one of the most iconic pieces of music in gaming history, an instantly recognizable melody that echoes throughout every Zelda game since. On February 21, 1986, The Legend of Zelda released in Japan as a launch title for the Famicom Disk System. The response was strong, though not immediately overwhelming. In 1986, video games were still primarily about quick arcade thrills, short experiences designed to be conquered in minutes. The concept of a game that unfolded like a fantasy novel with an open world to explore and a definite character arc was fresh and unusual. Players needed time to understand what Zelda was offering, a different pace and atmosphere that rewarded patience and curiosity rather than twitch reflexes. The game introduced concepts that seem obvious now, but were revolutionary in 1986. The top-down perspective gave players a clear view of their surroundings. The overworld connected to dungeons through exploration rather than menu selection. Dungeons were non-linear mazes where players needed to find keys, solve puzzles, and defeat bosses to obtain Triforce fragments. Items like bombs, bows, and boomerangs served dual purposes as both weapons and tools for solving environmental puzzles. Heart containers permanently increased Link's health, creating tangible progression. The game even had 2 quests, with a harder second quest that remixed dungeon layouts and enemy placements, essentially doubling the content for players who mastered the first quest. More than a year after the Japanese release, in August 1987, The Legend of Zelda launched in North America and Europe on the NES in cartridge format, rather than disc. This version included battery backup technology, one of the first NES games to feature internal saving. The gold cartridge became iconic, standing out on store shelves and signaling that this was something special. This US cartridge version was eventually released in Japan in 1994 as a standard format for Japanese players who didn't own the disc system. The North American release came with elaborate packaging and detailed manual filled with backstory, item descriptions, and subtle hints about where to find secrets. Reading the manual was essential for understanding the game's world and lore, a practice that seems quaint today but was standard for complex games of the era. The manual even included a partial map of the overworld, though it deliberately omitted many secrets, encouraging exploration and discovery. The reception in the West was even more enthusiastic than in Japan. American and European players accustomed to linear arcade-style games were captivated by Zelda's open-world exploration and sense of mystery. The game sold incredibly well, moving millions of copies and establishing itself as one of the NES's killer apps alongside Super Mario Bros. It introduced Western audiences to concepts that would become staples of adventure gaming: nonlinear exploration, puzzle solving integrated with combat, equipment upgrades that changed how you interacted with the world, and hidden secrets rewarding thorough investigation. The cultural impact was immediate and lasting. The Legend of Zelda didn't just succeed commercially, it fundamentally changed how developers and players thought about what video games could be. Before Zelda, games were challenges to overcome. After Zelda, games could be worlds to inhabit, mysteries to unravel, adventures to experience. The game proved that players wanted more than quick thrills. They wanted depth, exploration, discovery, and the satisfaction of solving puzzles through observation and experimentation rather than just reflexes. The game's influence on future titles cannot be overstated. The Metroidvania genre, named after Metroid and Castlevania, owes significant debt to Zelda's item-gated exploration and interconnected world design. Action-adventure games from Alundra to Okami to Dark Souls cite Zelda as foundational influence. Even modern RPGs incorporate Zelda's approach to integrating puzzles, combat, and exploration into cohesive experiences rather than keeping them segregated. These weren't just features, they were design languages that Miyamoto established and the industry adopted. The game's items tell their own interesting story. The recorder, also called the whistle, began the trend of music being an important part of Zelda games. Link has used various wind instruments throughout the series since then, but the recorder established that musical interaction would be a recurrent element. The latter, used to cross small gaps and rivers rather than climb, appeared only in this first game, though ladders themselves became common environmental objects in later titles. The clock, which appeared randomly after defeating enemies and froze all on-screen enemies temporarily, was another one-time item. These unique elements gave the original Zelda distinct identity, even as later games refined and evolved the formula. The second quest deserves special mention because it represented a revolutionary approach to difficulty and replay value. After completing the game once, players could start again with completely remixed dungeons. Rooms were rearranged, enemies were tougher, secrets were in different locations. This wasn't just New Game Plus with stat adjustments. It was essentially a different game using the same assets, dramatically extending playtime and challenge for players who mastered the first quest.
This concept of remixed content for replay value influenced countless games, from Resident Evil's alternate scenarios to modern roguelikes with procedural generation. Link himself was carefully designed to be relatable rather than cool. In an Iwata Asks interview years later, Miyamoto explained that in the first game, Link was about 12 years old, and in Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, he was about 16. Miyamoto never wanted to make Link just another cool hero. Until Ocarina of Time, Link was deliberately kept as a playful and childish character. This design philosophy made Link accessible to young players who could genuinely identify with him rather than feeling like they were controlling a distant action hero. The legacy of The Legend of Zelda extends beyond its direct sequels into its influence on gaming culture. The game pioneered the concept of gaming communities sharing secrets and discoveries. Before widespread internet access, players traded tips on playgrounds, called Nintendo's Game Counselor hotline, and shared hand-drawn maps. This organic community formation around collective problem-solving was exactly what Miyamoto intended when he made the game deliberately cryptic. He wanted people to talk, to share, to collaborate in discovering Hyrule's mysteries. The original Legend of Zelda sold over 6.5 million copies worldwide, an extraordinary number for 1986 and the NES era. It established Zelda as Nintendo's secondary flagship franchise alongside Mario, a position it maintains today. The game received widespread critical acclaim, with reviewers praising its scope, innovation, and addictive exploration. It won numerous awards and appeared on countless best games of all time lists for decades after release. Even today, when discussing the greatest games ever made, the original Legend of Zelda remains in the conversation alongside modern masterpieces. The game's technical achievements, while impressive for their time, pale compared to its design achievements. The graphics were simple, the sound was limited to a few channels, the storage was minuscule compared to modern standards. But none of that mattered because Miyamoto understood something fundamental. Great game design transcends technical specifications. The feeling of discovering a hidden cave, the satisfaction of defeating a difficult dungeon, the mystery of Hyrule's secrets, these experiences depend on design rather than technology. That's why The Legend of Zelda still holds up today when played on original hardware. The core loop of exploration and discovery remains satisfying regardless of graphical fidelity. The full story of The Legend of Zelda is ultimately about transformation. It transformed Shigeru Miyamoto's childhood memories into interactive art. It transformed video games from linear challenges into explorable worlds. It transformed how players interacted with games and each other. And it transformed Nintendo from a company that made successful games into an industry leader that defined what gaming could be. The seeds planted in this single 1986 title grew into an entire forest of games, mechanics, and design philosophies that shaped the industry 4 decades later. From a boy exploring caves near Kyoto to a legendary game designer capturing that wonder in digital form. From a risky, non-linear adventure game to one of the most successful franchises in history. From 112 kilobytes of disk space to a cultural phenomenon worth billions. The Legend of Zelda's journey is one of gaming's greatest stories. It proves that sometimes the most personal visions create the most universal experiences, that technical limitations can breed creative innovations, and that childhood wonder, when properly channeled, can change the world. That's the full story of The Legend of Zelda, a game that didn't just create a franchise, but redefined what video games could be.